Are we rolling?
We are rolling.
Okay. You want me to go first?
Sure.
What was it like growing up as a PK?
You want to start with that one? I don't know. You don't notice it until other people notice it. At Trinity, I felt like I had way more grandparents than other people did.
Your guidance counselor in elementary school, he, as part of his routine, he asked all the kids to draw a picture of their parents, and he has a picture of me in what he understood as a dress. What normal appearance of Dad was in a cassock and surplice.
Yeah. What is your origin story in Eastern Michigan?
Well, I was there for the whole thing.
Right.
I remember actually that there were 3 attempts to get a division in the Diocese of Michigan. The third one, of course, is the one that actually happened. So my origin story about all that was I thought it was a dumb idea. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought that was the case. Everybody went along with it, and I had to change my tune. And I figured it's better to participate in the change than continue fighting it when the battle's over. What are your earliest memories of church? And they would be at Trinity and Alpena.
Yeah, that's a good one. Probably the most vivid memories are making paper airplanes and throwing them out of the balcony. I think I did that all the time.
Trinity has a nice high balcony.
I think I only threw one during service once. What is a dream for this community that has been fulfilled in the last 25 years?
Well, one dream for the community, I can tell you, is fulfilled, and that's Camp Chickadami, where we are here today. When we first began, part of the idea was that each of the 4 convocations would take responsibility for some sort of function, and Camp Chick was Northern Michigan's, Northern Convocation's responsibility. It had been mothballed for probably 15, 20 years, and it was a kind of it was a slow start. It was a camp being run and organized by, as if we had a dozen or maybe 15 kids, and almost as many grandmothers and grandfathers running camp for a week. It worked well enough. We weren't going to pass any hold up the standards of a typical church camp with licensing and all the rest of it. That came later. Camp Chickadami has bloomed from that beginning. It's been quite a wonderful thing to see. Do you feel influenced by Eastern Michigan, our diocese, even though you're now in a different setting in a different diocese?
So the two things, yes and yes, right? There's the part which is the part where you can't avoid, right? You can't avoid where you came from, and so there's the sort of sense in which you compare everybody else to your home, and so everyone else seems weird. And then you go out into the world and you realize we're kind of like we're the weirdos, very much intending to be different from the sort of top-down, hierarchical, kingly bishop model where we have to build, we have to be part of the conversation. That every conversation starts with the people is not something other dioceses are used to at all. That part is I'm constantly starting there. What is your favorite story of the impact of an Eastern Michigan congregation?
The one I tell most often is about the little church in Mile, St. Bartholomew's. Bill Gordon was sent up by the powers that be in Detroit to close down St. Bartholomew's Mile because there were so few people. And as the story is told, he came quickly back to Detroit, tail between his legs, because they told him what he could do with his suggestion. They were not gonna shut down, and so they didn't. A woman showed up at the church door on Sunday with a whole trail full of children that she had, of her kids, I think 6 kids or something. She said, "Do you have a Sunday school?" And the answer from the usher was, "If you come back next Sunday, we'll have a Sunday school." They built the congregation up to a much more steady and dependable viability, and built a parish hall, and then became the center for all the convocation meetings. That did so many wonderful things, but it was a case of it all sort of rose up from the desire to be a church in the congregation. It's cool. inspiring. What impact do you think that we've had on the wider church?
Well, I think it's probably closer that Eastern Michigan is closer to where the mood of the people is. It's more that Eastern Michigan has been ahead of the curve.
Decentralization, the mood for dispersing decision making, and sort of anti-clericalism has risen and waned over the years, and I think we've had some influence, but not nearly as much influence as Northern Michigan has, actually, with their emphasis on the baptismal covenant. Before there was any emphasis on the baptismal covenant, they were the genesis of it. We learned a lot from them when we were organizing ourselves as a new diocese.
Did you know I would become a priest as well?
No. I thought you'd be a chemist. You were just so completely sharp in science and mathematics, and I'm sure you still are, and you were a detailed person. And with clergy, the typical clergy are generalists. But I'm pleased and honored to have you as a colleague in the ministry. What is one of the most important lessons you've learned in your ministry?
You really can't go wrong with just talking about Jesus. I mean, you really can't go wrong with telling stories from the gospel. People don't hear that anywhere.
That I've organized Bible studies and classes and whatnot for 45 years. But right now there just seems to be a greater interest and desire for Bible study, and there is a hunger, some kind of hunger. The world seems to be becoming less and less settled, less and less predictable, and maybe what that is producing is a renewed remembrance of the need and the hunger. Where have you felt the spirited work among us?
I've always loved going to convention.
Yes.
You know, again, in part because having been a part of other conventions.
Business
right, it's very business. The sort of sense of coming together for a party. And I think when I was younger, I didn't entirely appreciate it because I wanted more business, right? I wanted some more action. But a way in which it worked together, I think, was really good.
Working together as opposed to battling one another over issues.
But there's a sort of sense in what you're coming together there is purpose. Like the purpose isn't the institution. The purpose is the ministry. So we all come together and we're like, okay, where are we going together next time? And I think in a different kind of structure, the diocese is able to say, well, what do you think, leaders? Where should we go? And then the leaders go, oh shucks, I guess we'll go where I want to go, right? You know, and I think in this kind of environment, it's been sort of like it really is like where do we most want to go? And sometimes we need help, right? And sometimes we need each other. But more often when we hear each other's stories, we go, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that?
What brought you to the church for the first time?
Well, my parents.
Yeah, of course.
Right? At Alma, I started going to the chapel on campus because then I didn't have to drive. It was sort of sense that I could just stumble out of bed and I could go to the chapel, and they had a Bible study, and one of my friends asked me to go.
A friend invitation.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
How do you think your ministry would be different had Eastern Michigan not been created?
In the Diocese of Michigan, which had, in those days, had maybe upwards of 200 parishes, the likelihood of your being serving on a standing committee or a commission on ministry or a nominating committee for a bishop, I had been on those things, but the chances of your being involved in them was much diminished. But in the small diocese, with fewer people and fewer churches and fewer clergy, everybody has to do something. I began to appreciate that and could make a bigger contribution personally to the life of the diocese than I would have been able to do in the Diocese of Michigan.
The diocese was formed while I was in high school, and I'll tell you, was it the nominating convention for Ed? Was that at Trinity?
No,
which convention was
we
it?
did have a convention.
We had a convention.
We had a meeting at Trinity for the whole diocese.
Yes, and I remember my response was, "We can do that."
Sure. Trinity Alpena. Everybody drove up.
Up to that point, the very idea that there would be a diocesan meeting in Alpena was foreign to me. When I heard that we were hosting, I found that really confusing.
It was pretty exciting too. We were hosting the whole diocese.
Yeah.
And while the room is big enough, the nave is plenty big enough. And the one thing that we did not have as much of as we really thought we needed was bathrooms. 4 bathrooms.
Right. Okay.
2 men and 2 women at this point. So I had signs made, and I put all 4 bathrooms now became women. They all became women. And then I called up the local porta-john people and had them install 4 porta potties in the backyard. And so the gentlemen all had to go out in the backyard for the porta potties. They still use outhouses in Alpena. Is there an Eastern Michigan leader that you draw particular inspiration from?
Oh, jeez. Oh, you're making me pick.
You can't say to your dad.
Well, I can't. Well, I know that's the cheat. There are too many, and so I guess I'll just sort of pick a few. I really have appreciated Chuck Curtis for his leadership and his well, of course, knowing the canons better than anyone else, but it was his kindness. Elizabeth Chase was my advisor when I was going through the process. She was a good cheerleader for me and encouraging me to see things in a different way. I was really taken with Pete Clapp.
Yeah.
That the way he could tell a story and sort of get the room to listen. I always wanted to be in the room with him.
Pete and I seemed to click pretty well when we weren't fighting with each other. And one of the things we did was we're sitting down and thinking about, well, when we were thinking about how do you build a diocese out of nothing, a few principles were involved. One of them was simplicity. And Pete had an idea. Every diocese has to have a commission on ministry. And every diocese has to have a standing committee, but the other stuff you don't have to have by canon. You see, we started with the canons to figure out what you had to have and what you could do away with. Why not make the standing committee the commission on ministry? And that, since they have to vote on a candidate anyway,
right.
They have to recommend the candidate. So, in a sense, we were eliminating the commission on ministry by...
Yeah.
The genius in the system was that every candidate for ordination should follow the bishop around for a quarter. So, in other words, if the bishop had to do a parish visit, the candidate drove him around. The seminarian drove him around. The bishop drove and taught the seminarian. But anyway, the long and the short of it is the bishop would be the teacher of the seminarian for that last quarter before ordination. And then the bishop would thoroughly know the candidate, spending every day.
Yeah. Why did we do that?
I thought that was so cool.
That would have been awesome.
I think when Ed came on board, he wasn't exactly enthusiastic about not having a commission on ministry. But I thought I still think it's a cool idea. One of my heroes anyway, was Bill Gordon. He believed that the church was the people, and the people need to get out there and do it. And the clergy aren't there to do it for them. He laid the groundwork. And when he came on board in the Diocese of Michigan as assistant bishop, he came on to lift up the image of baptismal ministry, the ministry of the laity, of all people.
Right after I finished seminary, we had our that retreat up at on Mackinac.
Island Conference.
And the newly elected presiding bishop, Catherine Jeffers Shorey, was there.
Yeah.
There was this moment when Bishop Gordon was invoked, and this room full of people, like this sort of like tangible effect, and telling a story. His some famous line about we have it backwards. Our children should be in church and our adults should be in Sunday school.
Yes.
And and like the room erupted with knowing, like the sort of like sense of like knowing the story, knowing his character, knowing that sensation, and that there's this lesson that he's still prodding us into hearing, right? That we've got to turn it around, right? We've got to see this thing. We get to keep learning. We get to keep learning, and we need to keep inviting our children into loving and serving. And they don't need to be full of knowledge. They need the opportunity and
to experience
Jesus in the life of the church.
Life of the community.
And those of us who have been in the church for a while, it's time for us to go hit the books, right? You know, it's time for us to go see, to learn more and get a sense of what we're doing. The disciples, you think, should know this by now. But in Luke 10 and 11, right, they're still like, oh, hey, maybe we should kill a bunch of people. And he's like, no, who is my neighbor? Right? No, stop thinking like that.